Welcome to the Human Dignity by Design podcast, where we explore tech law and context and discuss how law and technology can and should be designed to respect human dignity. My name is Jan Trzaskowski, and I'm here to share research, thoughts, and ideas on tech law and policy, including the role of fundamental human rights as guiding principles in business and beyond. The first 12 episodes of this podcast are an audiobook version of my 2021 book, Your Privacy is Important to Us, which explores how to restore human dignity in data-driven marketing that relies on artificial intelligence. In this first episode, you will hear the foreword, written and read by my friend and colleague Eric K. Clemons from the Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, followed by the preface and the first chapter of the book, which clarifies its aim and purpose, methodology, delimitation, and structure. Thank you for listening. Foreword, written and read by Eric K. Clemons.
Western philosophical and legal traditions guarantee each individual the right to protect his own public image or persona. Libel and slander laws are just a small portion of that tradition. Western democracy is based on the idea of fully informed voters making rational decisions, and traditions of freedom of speech and freedom of the press are just a small portion of how Western societies protect voters' rights to be fully informed. Western industrial economies are based on the idea that consumers can buy products and use services with confidence from distant and massive manufacturers through intermediaries without ever being able to learn a fraction of what the manufacturer and the seller know. Western consumer protection regulations are in essence aimed at reducing these information asymmetries by ensuring that products are safe and that advertising practices cannot manipulate consumers or obscure the true nature of the products they are considering. All these traditional pillars that protect Western citizens are facing a mass extinction event. Mass extinctions do not usually occur because the environment has changed, but because the environment has changed so rapidly that organisms do not have time to adapt through normal evolutionary practices. The asteroid impact at the KT boundary did not immediately eliminate 75% of all species on Earth. Rather, the changes that occurred rapidly but not instantaneously across the entire global ecosystem caused mass extinctions over a short period of years. Changes in online business practices have been so rapid and so dramatic that Western business regulations have not had time to adapt. And a small collection of truly massive online corporations have gained so much power that they, and not governments, may be able to control the regulatory framework intended to protect consumers from abuse by these same corporations. Interestingly, Jan's focus is not merely on protecting competition or the right to informed choice when making practices, although he agrees that both are crucial. His focus is on the protection of human agency, the ability to act in one's own interest without undue manipulation. And he focuses even more intently on the protection of human dignity, because without agency, we are all mere pawns, or worse, we are clockwork oranges, not chewed up by God or the devil or the almighty state in their own struggles, but chewed up and discarded for an incremental contribution to corporate profits. Despite its lofty and esoteric-sounding goals, this book is quite firmly grounded in a range of scholarly traditions, including marketing, law, psychology, and philosophy. And despite Jan's concerns about a possible dystopian future, he in the book remains surprisingly optimistic. As he writes on the very first page of Chapter 1, the hypothesis is that the negative consequences can be mitigated with negligible impact on the benefits from technologies, which will make society richer in a broad sense. The hope is to steer us away from entering a new dark age with limited scientific and cultural advancement. No reader can be fully familiar with the range of disciplines upon which this book is based. It therefore provides essential introductions to each of these disciplines, including the assumptions that the author makes when interpreting each. Readers who agree with the author's conclusions know how the conclusions were reached. More importantly, readers who disagree with any of the conclusions also know the assumptions on which they were based, and are well positioned either to disagree with the author's conclusions or to question their own assumptions. Many previous authors have argued that users pay for Google and Facebook with access to their data, and that since this data is very valuable, users are overpaying for services that are apparently free. Others argue that this theft of value, by observing users' behavior, is the essential and fundamental evil behind surveillance capitalism. This book argues that this analysis is incomplete and, as a result, is inaccurate in many ways. Most importantly, consumers simply don't care about paying with data, since they perceive that sharing data costs them nothing. The visible advantages that consumers get from this surveillance capitalism include personalized service and the absence of irrelevant ads. That is, freedom from the internet equivalent of robocalls during dinner. This book argues that the downside is far less visible to consumers and to citizens more broadly, and far more harmful to them simply because it is less visible. There is a joke beloved of scoutmasters, teachers of cultural adaptation, and politicians, of a bird who asks a couple of fish, "How's the water today?" The fish are dumbfounded and ask, "What's water?" If water is all you know, water is no longer a thing. Google and Facebook don't just decide what to show us. For many of us, they determine our realities. There is no concern among users that their reality has been distorted, because what they are shown by Google and Facebook is their reality. We are not paying for these services with data. We are paying for these services with our attention. More fundamentally, we are paying for these services not only with what we do see, but with what we do not see. For many users, Google and Facebook do not present ads or present worldviews that distort reality. Google and Facebook replace reality in order to provide users with something tailored to be more interesting to each. I would add that this tailoring enables something far more important than the manipulation of our attention. It enables the manipulation of our preferences and manipulation of our actions. This is not surveillance capitalism, but something far more dangerous. This is alternative reality capitalism and manipulation capitalism. The author argues that although consumers have adopted so many of these platform services, it is hard to argue that they have retained control over their actions or agency, and that many consumers accept these services either because they are not really certain how they are being manipulated, or even because they have no viable alternatives. Our own research confirms both. We generally see a percentage of 5% or less of users who are both aware of how their data are used by online platforms and would approve of it if they knew about the platform activities. In some ways, I am less optimistic than the author. Jan sees the law and regulation as limiting the power of online marketeers and social media companies. I see the companies as developing power that will be greater than the regulators. Jan sees consumers, in concert with regulators and other government authorities, reining in the power of these mostly American giant platforms and allowing more benign competitors to emerge. I see these giant platform companies developing platform development strategies, adding more and more services, and creating such super additive value that no other companies can compete effectively. In this Faustian bargain, consumers are not paying merely with cash for excessively high prices, to which they would object and for which they would get regulatory support. They're not even paying with data, for which they seem to have no serious objections. They are paying by sacrificing their agency and free will, and they are paying by sacrificing their human dignity. And nothing in American or EU anti-monopoly law addresses the Faustian abuse of human dignity. The worst abuses of manipulation capitalism are not getting consumers to buy products they don't need and shouldn't want. The worst abuses of manipulation capitalism include election manipulation, deadly activities like recruitment for extremist ideologies, and things both dangerous and apparently trivial, like distorting young women's self-perceptions to make them more compliant consumers. The worst abuses involve replacing our perceived realities so we do not, indeed, see the water. This book will help us all understand who is abusing us through big technology and how. It will enable us to see the water as it really is. And it may enable us to respond to the dangers of manipulation capitalism, not as threats to capitalism based on monopoly power, but as something far more pernicious, less visible, and more dangerous to individual dignity and to the functioning of our complex societies. If social media represent a threat comparable to global climate change, this book offers hope that we can understand and respond to those changes sooner. Unlike carbon-based threats to our environment, technological threats are emerging faster and will demand a faster response.
Preface. When I was in my early teens, I spent countless hours programming Commodore 64 assembly language. The codes were published in my column in a national computer magazine, IC Run, and at the time I thought that I would earn my living as a programmer. My technical skills and technological curiosity were revitalized when I studied law in the period 1992 to 1997, which coincided with a transformative period when the internet had its popular and commercial breakthrough. Since then, I've come to realize that people too can be programmed through psychology and marketing, and have explored the role that technology, much like a computer code, plays in designing our behavior. While I was writing this preface, it struck me that by becoming an educator, I have actually ended up earning my living as a programmer. I remain fascinated by technology, including the social, societal, and economic progress that it has to offer. However, growing surveillance and manipulation capabilities have made me question whether society benefits sufficiently from the democratization of information that is spurred and facilitated by the internet. Similarly, learned about bounded rationality and persuasive technology has made me question whether data protection law and consumer protection law really deliver the empowerment and transparency they are meant to provide. As lawyer and legal scholar, I have for more than 2 decades focused on the regulation of information, particularly in the context of marketing law and data protection law, without initially realizing how the now obvious convergence between these 2 legal disciplines in the context of the data-driven marketing that is now a dominant revenue model for data-driven business models. This book is about predatory business models that distort and manipulate human agency. The predatory aspects of these business models thrive in the modern information society, where technology is also used to observe and influence human behavior. This is to emphasize that the negative aspects of technology I focus on stem from its application and not from technology as such. Writing this book has been a long process. It builds on and is reflected in most of the research listed under my name in the bibliography. I am also pleased to have drawn inspiration from the other literature mentioned there. In line with legal tradition, I use footnotes allowing for expedient identification of references. Most of the issues dealt with in this book are not new, but their importance is still growing. It is important for me to think of solutions to these challenges, and my main hypothesis is that most of the legal solutions presented in this book can be achieved by means of a holistic and teleological interpretation of existing laws. I hope to inspire both the judiciary and the legislature, as well as other people with stakes or interest in the legal ecosystem. My goal is to inform and amplify ongoing debates pertaining to data-driven business models by providing a coherent framing of data-driven marketing in the context of law, psychology, technology, and society. Being programmable is not the characteristic of human beings that set us apart from other animals. With this book, I hope to also subtly emphasize the importance of social skills, which are best learned in interaction with other human beings, including through technological means, preferably without Big Brother in whatever shape or form as facilitator. I look forward to discussing the ideas presented in this book with a view to building more robust arguments to ensure human dignity in markets and elsewhere. The book is meant as a source and inspiration for further research, including my own, and it is in itself a hypothesis that I hope will be debated and challenged. Thank you for reading thus far. I hope that you will find your attention well spent and that this book will resonate with, challenge, and inspire your adaptive chemical wiring. Copenhagen and Gilleleje, November 2021, Jan Trzaskowski. Chapter 1. Why this book? The Internet has delivered on many of the promises that it offered the information society in the wake of its popular and commercial breakthrough in the 1990s. In that vein, its impact is comparable to the introduction in the middle 1400s of the printing press with movable type, an invention that ushers us out of the Dark Ages through the age of discovery and enlightenment to the current age of information, attention, and addiction. This book is about the downsides of certain business models that often rely on the Internet and dominate large parts of the modern information society. The hypothesis is that the negative consequences can be mitigated with negligible impact on the benefits from the technologies, which will make society richer in a broad sense. The hope is to steer us away from entering a new dark age with limited scientific and cultural advancement. 1. Aim and objectives. The aim of this book is to inform and amplify ongoing debates by providing a coherent framing of data-driven marketing in the context of law, psychology, technology, and society. The objective is to elucidate how data protection law and consumer protection law can work in tandem to mitigate negative effects of data-driven business models that challenge democracy by infringing on human dignity. At the core of the predatory aspects of data-driven business models are the capabilities for surveillance and manipulation that may have both personal, social, and societal consequences. Therefore, the objective includes to consider the role of fundamental rights, that is primary law, that are intended to protect human dignity and democracy. 2. Methodology. The analyses are based on a legal methodology that focuses on the analysis of sources of law, including in particular legislation and case law. Administrative documents including, for example, Commission staff working documents, as well as guidelines from the EDPB and its predecessor, the Article 29 Working Party, are included with the caveat that such sources do not necessarily reflect valid law. This book builds on legal methodology that embraces the Court of Justice appetite for teleological, effective and holistic interpretation of EU law, which is further substantiated and discussed in Part 2. Many of the issues have not been dealt with by the Court of Justice, and the solutions outlined here do not necessarily reflect how the Court of Justice eventually will interpret the law. It is thus an additional aim to inspire lawmakers as well as enforcement authorities and other litigators, with a view to having the arguments tested with the judiciary. 2.1. Law and policy. Politics and law are intertwined. Law reflects political decisions, and political opinions suggest how the law should be amended. Legal scholars use the distinction between de lege lata, the law as it exists, and de lege ferenda, the law as it should be. Law is not an exact science, especially when case law from the Court of Justice is sparse, as is the case for many of the topics dealt with here. A prognosis for de lege lata must be associated with uncertainty, known unknowns. Thus, some findings may turn out to be de lege lata and others de lege ferenda. Law is dynamic. If judges of the Court of Justice, maybe after reading this book, decide to interpret the law in a way that is aligned with the presented arguments, our prognosis turns out to be right, that is, de lege lata, even though there was no supporting case law when the arguments was presented in this book. Conversely, if a subsequent judgment debunks an argument or prognosis, it will turn out to fall under de lege ferenda that may be achieved through legislation. The aim is to provide a prognosis for de lege lata while being aware that new legislation or case law may be required. As the primary purpose of this book is to facilitate an informed debate on the regulation of data-driven marketing, it is not crucial in which box an argument falls. We aim to provide arguments and prognoses that are 1. Not inconsistent with current legal sources, including case law, and 2. Not unlikely given the legal arguments as well as cited research from outside the field of law. 3. Assumptions and delimitations. In the legal analysis in this book, we apply research from different disciplines within business, psychology, and technology. References to resources are made when arguments are presented, but it is neither possible nor desirable to present an exhaustive account of all research areas. If the reader should not find the arguments from other disciplines to be sufficiently substantiated, we draw inspiration from the field of economics and hereby include them as assumptions, that is, facts or evidence for the purpose of this research. This is no less problematic than the economic assumptions of fully rational consumers, which we explore in Chapter 6. For our legal analysis, we focus on data protection law, marketing law, and fundamental rights, as introduced in Part 2. We do not go into detail with enforcement, but address some aspects of effective enforcement and fines in Chapter 12. In particular, we will not focus on competition law or tax law that also regulates important legal aspects of data-driven business models. Aspects of platform liability and contract law are also excluded in order to keep the book focused. Inspiration is, however, drawn from consumer protection aspects of contract law. Given efficient tax planning and the size of big tech actors, much focus has, for good reasons, been on tax law and competition law, that is, antitrust and monopoly law. Consumer protection law, including data protection law in this context, has the advantage that, in contrast to competition law, it applies to traders regardless of market power. Even if there exists real competition among providers of, for example, search and social media, imagine a market with few Googles and a few Facebooks. There are still intrinsic parts of data-driven business models that are likely to infringe on privacy and distort the economic interest of consumers. We focus on European Union law, but insights, ideas, and solutions can be translated to inspire legal interpretation and legislation in jurisdictions outside the European Union. Longer descriptions of legislative proposals are avoided, and we do not go into details with the proposed e-privacy regulation, Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, and Artificial Intelligence Act. Also, as our focus is on consumer protection, we do not go into details with the platform-to-business regulation. This book is about the regulation of business models rather than technology. 4. Structure. 4.1. Part 1. Introduction. In the first part, we will explore the nature and role of data-driven business models in business-to-consumer markets. The primary attributes we focus on is 1. Personalization and surveillance, 2. Value extraction and behavior modification, and 3. That the products are often offered for free. These business models are often associated with information technology that is easy to automate and scale. 4.2, Part 2, Law. We introduce the concept of law as a system of regulating behavior in society based on specific goals and by balancing often conflicting interests. In the markets, relevant interests pertain to competition, that is other traders, consumers, citizens, and society as such. In this vein, we introduce fundamental rights, data protection law, the GDPR, and marketing law, the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. These legal disciplines are further elaborated and applied in the rest of the book. 4.3, Part 3, Psychology and Technology. Human agency and the right to self-determination are central concepts in legal theory, as well as in consumer protection law, where the regulatory framework aims at empowering consumers to act in accordance with their goals, values, and preferences. In this part, we focus on human decision-making, while elucidating how psychology and technology can affect human behavior and inspire law. Empowerment requires capable individuals, transparency, and the absence of manipulation. 4.4, Part 4, Society. We revisit fundamental rights and discuss their role in market regulation. Attention and agency are scarce and precious resources that, once consumed by data-driven business models, cannot be used for other social or societal activities. To the extent that business models rely on surveillance, attention, extraction, and behavior modification, it seems reasonable to discuss the freedom to conduct a business in light of human dignity, privacy, and non-discrimination. We discuss the important concept of proportionality in light of the fundamental rights to conduct a business. 4.5, Part 5, Conclusions and Beyond. The conclusion is deliberately detailed so that the time-conscious reader can quickly get an overview over the book's primary messages. After the conclusions, we introduce measures that may enhance transparency, empowerment, and human well-being in the context of data-driven business models. This includes the use of technology, that is humane technology and human welfare computing, the role of education, which in itself is a part of consumer protection, and necessary conversations. The aim must be to ensure that markets and technology eventually work for people and not vice versa. Thank you for joining the Human Dignity by Design podcast, where we explore tech law in context. In the next episode, I will read the second chapter of Your Privacy is Important to Us, which is about understanding data-driven business models and how they may be harmful to society. Music for this podcast is composed and performed by Thomas Roh. My name is Jan Trzaskowski.